Have you ever been made to feel small, worthless, like a forgotten chapter in someone else's triumphant story? This isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a story about the quiet, unyielding power of self-worth. It begins in the glittering heart of high society at a gala where a man named Richard Sterling is holding court. He's a peacock in $1,000 suit, his voice booming as he brags about his life, his success, and the beautiful young woman on his arm. The subject of his cruelest jokes, the wife he discarded, Eleanor. He paints her as a pathetic, forgotten woman, but he's about to learn a lesson that no amount of money can buy. The past doesn't always stay buried, and sometimes it returns, not in a beat-up sedan, but in a custom Rolls-Royce with a billionaire at the wheel. The Oakwood Valley Country Club was a cathedral of old money and new ambition, and tonight, at its annual summer gala, Richard Sterling was preaching from the pulpit. He stood near the sprawling ice sculpture of a swan, a flute of champagne in one hand, and his other arm wrapped possessively around the waist of his fiancée, Tiffany Monroe. Tiffany was 24, with hair the color of spun gold and a smile that had been perfected for Instagram filters. She was in Richard's eyes the ultimate accessory, a testament to his post-divorce success. "Honestly, I feel like I've been reborn," Richard announced to a captive audience of fellow investment brokers and their immaculately preserved wives. His voice was a confident baritone that sliced through the polite chatter and the distant strains of a string quartet. "It's like I was driving a sensible, reliable Ford for 15 years. Utterly boring, you know. Did its job, got me from A to B, but zero excitement. Then I traded it in for a Ferrari. Sleek, powerful, turns every head on the street." He squeezed Tiffany's waist and she giggled, a sound like tiny bells. "No offense, darling." "None taken, babe," Tiffany cooed, tilting her head. "I love being your Ferrari." The group chuckled, but a few of the older wives exchanged tight-lipped glances. They remembered Eleanor. They remembered the quiet grace she brought to these events, the intelligence in her eyes that Richard had always seemed so eager to dim. "What's old Eleanor up to these days, anyway?" asked a portly man named Robert Croft, Richard's senior partner. Richard took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. He loved this question. It was the setup for his favorite punchline. "Eleanor, oh God. Last I heard, she's renting some shoebox apartment downtown. You know that little design hobby she had? The sketches and fabric swatches all over the dining room table. She's trying to make a go of it. Eleanor Vance Interiors, or some such nonsense." He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Can you imagine from this?" He gestured around the opulent ballroom to picking out throw pillows for middle-class housewives in the suburbs. "It's tragic, really." He leaned in conspiratorially. "I was generous in the divorce, of course. A man of my stature has to be. But she was proud. 'I don't want your money, Richard,' she said." He mimicked her voice, pitching it high and reedy. "I want to make it on my own. Noble, I suppose, in a pathetic sort of way. I give her 6 months before she comes crawling back, begging for a top-up on her alimony." The truth, however, was a far uglier story. The 15 years with Richard hadn't been a sensible Ford. They had been a gilded quatorze. Eleanor had met him in college. He was ambitious and charming. She was bright, creative, and saw a future she thought they could build together. She put her own architectural aspirations on hold to support his budding career in finance. She hosted the dinner parties, remembered the clients' birthdays, and cultivated the social connections that were so vital to his ascent. Her silly little hobby was in fact a deep-seated passion for architectural and interior design. Her notebooks weren't filled with doodles, they were filled with detailed floor plans, innovative material concepts, and sketches of sustainable, human-centric living spaces. Whenever she tried to show him, he would wave a dismissive hand. "That's nice, honey." He'd say, his eyes glued to the stock market ticker on his phone. "But let's leave the building to the big boys, eh? Why don't you focus on the guest list for the fundraiser?" The belittling was subtle at first, 1,000 tiny cuts. He'd helpfully suggest a different dress for a party because hers wasn't quite right. He'd correct her in front of friends when she spoke about politics or finance, framing it as a gentle lesson. He'd call her design work cute, a word that felt like a slap. He controlled the finances with an iron fist, giving her an allowance as if she were a child, despite their wealth being built on the foundation of her social and emotional labor. The breaking point wasn't a single event, but a slow, dawning horror. She was 40 years old, looking in the mirror one morning, and saw a stranger. The spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. She was a ghost in her own home, a beautifully dressed manager of Richard Sterling's life. That afternoon, while he was at the club, she found one of his burner phones. It was filled with messages to a 22-year-old intern, a girl who would later be replaced by Tiffany. But it wasn't even the affair that broke her. It was the realization that he was utterly incapable of seeing her as an equal, as a person, with a mind and a soul of her own. Leaving was the hardest thing she had ever done. He had been vicious. "You'll be nothing without me," he'd screamed, his handsome face contorted with rage. "You're throwing away a perfect life because you want to play with crayons." She refused the opulent house, the cuz, and the blood money he called alimony. She took only what she had come with her personal savings from before the marriage, her clothes, and her notebooks full of dreams. The world he painted for his friends of a proud, foolish woman was a carefully constructed fiction to mask the truth. She hadn't just left him. She had escaped him. And in that shoebox apartment downtown, surrounded by unpacked boxes and the lingering smell of fear and freedom, Eleanor Vance wasn't picking out throw pillows. She was hunched over a drafting table, the glow of her laptop illuminating a set of blueprints, so audacious, so revolutionary, that they would have made Richard Sterling's world look like a child's sandcastle. She wasn't crawling, she was building. The first 6 months were brutal. The shoebox apartment felt less like a fresh start and more like a prison cell on some days. The hum of the old refrigerator was a constant companion, a stark contrast to the cathedral-like silence of her former home. Every creak of the floorboards in the apartment above was a reminder of how far she had fallen in the eyes of the world she'd left behind. Eleanor poured what little savings she had into starting her business. She built a simple, elegant website showcasing her student portfolio and a few conceptual projects she'd designed in her spare time. She called herself Vance Design Studios, dropping the Eleanor to sound more like a firm and less like a lone, desperate woman. The rejections came swiftly. Established firms saw her as a housewife with a hobby. Potential clients in Richard's circle, whom she tried to contact, either ghosted her or politely declined, no doubt, after a warning call from her ex-husband. She took on tiny, soul-crushing jobs to pay the rent, helping a family pick out paint colors for their nursery, advising on new curtains for a dentist's waiting room. Richard's mocking words echoed in her ears on the lonely bus rides home, picking out throw pillows for middle-class housewives. She was on the verge of admitting defeat, of taking a retail job at a furniture store when the email arrived. It was terse professional and came from an address she didn't recognize as est.finch@ViridianDynamics. Com. Subject design consultation. Ms. Vance. Mr. Alistair Finch has reviewed your conceptual work online, specifically the Elysian project. He requests a consultation to discuss the design of a private study and library. An NDA will be required prior to the meeting. Please advise on your availability. Regards, Catherine, Executive Assistant to Alistair Finch. Eleanor stared at the name. Alistair Finch. She had to Google it. The results made her heart hammer against her ribs. Alistair Finch wasn't just wealthy. He was a titan, a visionary tech billionaire who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and then pivoted into revolutionary architectural development through his company, Viridian Dynamics. He was notoriously private, a recluse who hadn't been photographed publicly in years. His projects were the stuff of legend, self-sustaining corporate campuses, eco-friendly residential towers that purified the air around them. He had seen her Elysium project, a conceptual design she had created years ago, a dream of a home that lived in harmony with its environment, using geothermal heating, passive solar design, and recycled materials. Richard had glanced at the sketches once and laughed. Looks like a glorified hobbit hole, L. Who would pay for that? Apparently, Alistair Finch would. The meeting was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It wasn't in a stuffy boardroom. She was driven by a silent chauffeur to a discreet address on the coast, a modern but unassuming house cantilevered over the Pacific. There was no sign on the gate, no ostentatious display of wealth. Alistair Finch was waiting for her, not in a suit, but in a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans. He was older than her, perhaps in his early 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the nervous facade she had erected. There was a quiet intensity about him, a stillness that was the polar opposite of Richard's performative bluster. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice calm and warm. "Thank you for coming. I apologize for the secrecy. I value my privacy." He gestured for her to sit, not across a desk, but in one of two comfortable armchairs by a window overlooking the churning ocean. "Your Elysian concept," he began, getting straight to the point. "It's not just design, it's a philosophy. You understand that a space should not just be inhabited, but experienced. That it should serve the person, not the other way around." For 2 hours, they didn't talk about fabrics or furniture. They talked about light and shadow, about the psychology of space, about the flow of energy through a home. He listened, truly listened, as she explained her ideas, his gaze never leaving her face. He asked insightful questions, challenging her, pushing her, treating her not as a decorator, but as a fellow creator. For the first time in 15 years, Eleanor felt seen. She got the job, of course. The study was a test. She passed with flying colors, creating a space that was both a sanctuary and a powerhouse of creativity, perfectly reflecting the man himself. One project led to another, a guest house, a complete redesign of a corporate retreat in the mountains. He paid her invoices promptly and generously, but it was his mentorship that was the real currency. He gave her access to his resources, introduced her to cutting-edge material scientists and engineers, and championed her vision. Under his quiet patronage, Vance Design Studios flourished. She hired a small, brilliant team. They moved from the shoebox apartment to a sleek, minimalist office downtown. Her name began to be whispered in elite architectural circles, a rising star with a fresh, sustainable vision. Their professional relationship slowly, naturally blossomed into something more. It began with late-night work sessions, turning into long dinners, conversations, shifting from blueprints to life, to dreams, to the scars they both carried from their pasts. He was a widower, his wife having passed away years ago, and he spoke of her with a gentle reverence that made Eleanor's heart ache for the respect she had never known with Richard. Alistair was drawn to her resilience, her fierce intellect, and the passion that Richard had tried so hard to extinguish. Eleanor, in turn, found in him a safe harbor. He wasn't her savior, he was her partner. His wealth was incidental to the man. He was kind, respectful, and genuinely in awe of her talent. He didn't want to dim her light. He wanted to build a bigger stage for it. "You know," he said one evening, as they stood on the balcony of her newly completed mountain project, the stars, brilliant in the clear night sky. "I'm on the board of the Oakwood Valley Preservation Society. Their annual gala is next week. It's usually a dreadful affair, but I feel obligated to go." He turned to her, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of accompanying me." Eleanor's blood ran cold for a second. The Oakwood Gala, Richard's kingdom, the stage for her annual humiliation, the thought of walking in there. Then she looked at Alistair's face, at the unwavering respect in his eyes. She thought of her team, her successful projects, the woman she had become. She was no longer the ghost of Richard Sterling's wife. She was Eleanor Vance. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. I'd love to, Alistair. I think it's time I revisited my old stomping grounds. The air in the Oakwood Valley ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and self-congratulation. Richard Sterling was in his element, the center of a rapt circle. His voice rising and falling with practiced cadence as he regaled them with the story of his life's brilliant second act. It's all about trading up, he declared, giving Tiffany's arm a proprietary squeeze. In business, in life, you have to be ruthless. Cut your losses. Eleanor, bless her heart, she was a loss. A comfortable one for a while, but she lacked vision. She couldn't see the big picture. Robert Croft, his boss, nodded sagely, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. A man needs a woman who inspires him to reach greater heights, not one who wants to retile the bathroom. The men around them brayed with laughter. Tiffany preened, basking in the reflected glory of her man the visionary. She ran a hand down his lapel. My baby is building an empire, she said, her voice breathy. Tell them about the North Ridge project, honey. Richard's chest puffed out. This was his masterstroke. Ah, yes, North Ridge. Sterling and Croft is finalizing the deal on a massive parcel of land just north of the city. We're going to build the most exclusive luxury housing development this state has ever seen. Think gated community, but on a whole other level. Private golf course, equestrian center. We're talking legacy. He lowered his voice, making it sound like a state secret. We're days away from closing. It's going to put us on the map permanently. Ali. And he conveniently left out the part where the financing was stretched to its absolute limit, that the deal was precariously balanced on a knife's edge, and that his personal finances were deeply entangled with the project's success. To his audience, he was a king surveying his domain. It was precisely at that moment that the low murmur of the crowd near the grand entrance began to change. The polite chatter faltered, replaced by a wave of shushed whispers and craned necks. A ripple of silence spread through the ballroom as if a switch had been flipped. Richard, annoyed at having his spotlight stolen, turned his head. What's all the fuss about? He grumbled. Through the grand archway, framed like a masterpiece, a scene was unfolding that defied belief. A long, impossibly sleek, custom-built Rolls-Royce Phantom, a shade of deep midnight blue, that seemed to drink the light, had just purred to a stop. This wasn't the standard Mercedes or BMW that littered the club's valet line. This was a car that whispered, not shouted, its owner's status. A uniformed chauffeur opened the rear door. A single, elegant, high-heeled shoe, crafted from emerald green satin, emerged first, followed by a slender leg. Then a woman stood up and turned towards the entrance, and a collective gasp swept up the room. It was Eleanor, but it wasn't the Eleanor they remembered. The timid, tastefully beige wife of Richard Sterling was gone. This woman was a vision. She wore a floor-length gown of liquid silver silk that clung to her form, its simple architectural lines speaking of a confidence that needed no frills or ruffles. Her hair, once kept in a sensible bob, was now a cascade of rich auburn waves swept over one shoulder. A simple but breathtaking necklace of emeralds and diamonds rested at her throat, echoing the color of her shoes. She looked radiant, powerful, and utterly serene. Richard's jaw went slack. His champagne flute tilted a few drops, spilling onto the polished floor. Tiffany's perfectly applied smile froze and then tightened, her eyes narrowing as she took in the woman who was supposed to be a pathetic frump. My God, Robert Croft breathed, his eyes wide. Is that... But the true shock was yet to come. As Eleanor paused at the threshold, allowing the room to take her in, a man emerged from the other side of the Rolls-Royce. He was tall and distinguished, his bespoke charcoal suit fitting him like a second skin. He moved with an understated authority that made every other man in the room, including Richard, suddenly look like a boy playing dress-up. He came to Eleanor's side, offered her his arm, and they walked into the ballroom together. The whispers in the room erupted into a flurry of frantic murmurs. "That's Alistair Finch." "No, it can't be. He never comes to these things." "It is him. I saw a picture of him in Forbes." "What is he doing here with her?" Richard felt the blood drain from his face. Alistair Finch, the reclusive, untouchable demigod of tech and development, the man whose net worth was so vast that Richard's entire empire wouldn't even qualify as a rounding error. And he was here with Eleanor on his arm, looking at her, not like a trophy, but with an expression of profound admiration and affection. They moved through the crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea. They weren't seeking attention yet, they commanded it completely. The alpha energy had shifted in the room, moving from Richard's loud, fragile ego to the quiet, unshakable presence of the man beside his ex-wife. Eleanor's eyes scanned the room, calm and cool. They swept past the stunned faces of the women who had pitied her, the men who had dismissed her. Finally, her gaze landed on Richard. She didn't glare or smirk. She simply met his eyes with a look of cool, distant recognition, the look one might give a piece of furniture from a life long past. And in that single, devastatingly neutral glance, Richard Sterling felt himself shrink. His $1,000 suit suddenly felt cheap. His boasts about Ferraris and empires turned to ash in his mouth, and the beautiful young woman clinging to his arm felt less like a prize and more like a consolation trophy. The Queen had returned to the board, and he was just a pawn in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The universe seemed to bend around Eleanor and Alistair as they glided towards the center of the room. The string quartet, as if on cue, swelled into a more dramatic piece. People didn't know whether to stare or look away. Richard, rooted to the spot, felt a cold sweat prickle his brow. His carefully constructed reality was fracturing before his very eyes. Tiffany was the first to break the spell of silence in their small group. "Who is that old guy?" she hissed, her voice sharp with insecurity. "And what did she do to her hair?" Richard didn't answer. He was watching his ex-wife, the woman he had called boring and visionless, move with the poise of royalty. He watched as the club president, a man who usually only gave Richard a cursory nod, rushed over to greet Alistair Finch with a fawning deference that was almost painful to watch. Driven by a toxic cocktail of disbelief and wounded pride, Richard knew he couldn't just stand there. To do nothing would be to admit defeat. He had to regain control of the narrative. He straightened his tie, plastered a wide, predatory smile on his face, and began to stride towards them, dragging a reluctant Tiffany behind him. "Well, well, well," Richard boomed, forcing a jovial tone as he intercepted them near the bar. "Eleanor, I almost didn't recognize you. You clean up nicely." It was meant to be a backhanded compliment, a reassertion of his dominance. Eleanor turned to face him. Her expression was placid, betraying nothing. "Richard," she said, her voice even and calm. It held none of the hurt or anger he expected. It held nothing at all for him, and that was somehow worse. Alistair Finch turned his gaze on Richard, and for the first time Richard felt the full force of the man's presence. Alistair's eyes weren't hostile, they were analytical, like a scientist studying a particularly uninteresting insect. "Richard, I'd like you to meet Alistair Finch," Eleanor said smoothly. "Alistair, this is my ex-husband, Richard Sterling." Richard puffed out his chest and extended a hand. "Richard Sterling, Sterling and Croft. A pleasure. Big admirer of your work, Mr. Finch. We're in development as well, though on a more grounded scale." He laughed, a hollow, booming sound. Alistair took his hand in a firm, brief grip. His hand was warm, his grip effortless but solid. "Sterling," he said, his voice quiet, yet carrying immense weight. "I'm not familiar with your firm." It was a simple statement of fact, but it landed like a punch to the gut. Richard's firm was his identity, his pride. To the most important man in the industry, it didn't even exist. Richard's smile faltered. And this, Richard said, recovering quickly and pulling Tiffany forward, is my fiancée, Tiffany Monroe. Tiffany offered a flirty little wave. Hi, love your car? Alistair gave her a polite, fleeting nod before his attention returned fully to Eleanor. Eleanor, would you care for a drink? I believe they have that sparkling water from the Italian Alps you enjoy. The casual intimacy of the comment was another blow. He knew her preferences. Richard, after 15 years of marriage, could barely remember if she took sugar in her coffee. He felt a hot flush of jealousy that was as surprising as it was intense. So, Eleanor, Richard pressed on, unable to let it go. What's the story? Did you win the lottery? He gestured between her and Alistair. Or did you finally find someone to bankroll your little design hobby? The insult hung in the air, crude and obvious. Several people nearby who had been shamelessly eavesdropping winced. Tiffany smirked, sensing her fiancé was back on the offensive. This time it was Eleanor who laughed. It wasn't the bitter laugh he expected. It was a light, genuinely amused sound. Bankroll, she repeated, a small smile playing on her lips. She turned to Alistair. Did you hear that, darling? He thinks you're my financier. Alistair's expression remained impassive, but there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. Richard, he said, his voice dropping half an octave, becoming steelier. I am not Eleanor's financier. I am her biggest client, and more importantly, I am her partner. Vance Design Studios is the lead architectural and design firm for Viridian Dynamics' new Terra initiative. The name dropped into the conversation like a 10-ton weight. The Terra initiative was the most talked about, most secretive, and most ambitious project on the planet. A plan to build a series of fully self-sustaining carbon-negative cities. It was the future of architecture, and Eleanor, the woman he'd mocked for her Hobbit Hole sketches, was the lead designer. Robert Croft, who had sidled up behind Richard, made a choking sound. Vance Design. Your ex-wife is Vance Design, he whispered hoarsely to Richard. Richard's mind reeled. The whispers he'd heard about a mysterious genius firm called Vance Design. He had assumed it was some established German or Scandinavian company. He never, not in a million years, would have connected it to her. Eleanor looked directly at Richard, her eyes clear and strong. My little hobby, as you used to call it, is currently managing a project portfolio worth several $1 billion, Richard. It turns out some people appreciate vision. And she didn't say it with malice, but with a simple, devastating finality. The foundation of Richard's world was not just cracking, it was turning to dust. He had built his entire identity on the belief that he was the successful one, the visionary, and she was the failure. In the space of 5 minutes, that entire narrative had been inverted. He was a small-time developer, hustling for a land deal. She was shaping the future of cities. He looked desperately at Tiffany, seeking an ally, but her face was a mask of confusion and dawning horror. The man she'd attached herself to, the one she thought was a titan, was being effortlessly dwarfed. Her Ferrari was suddenly looking like a beat-up used car next to Eleanor's rocket ship. Richard opened his mouth to say something, anything to save face, but no words came out. He was completely and utterly undone. And the worst part was the night wasn't over. The true devastation was still to come. Just as Richard was floundering, searching for a lifeline in a sea of his own, making a new sound cut through the ballroom's hushed atmosphere. It wasn't music or chatter, but the coordinated chime of dozens of smartphones. A wave of notifications rippled through the gala as guests pulled out their devices, their faces illuminated by the screens. Robert Croft's phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out, his brow furrowed with irritation, which quickly morphed into stark disbelief. His eyes widened, and he stared at his screen, then at Alistair Finch, then at Richard. Richard, Robert whispered, his voice trembling slightly. It's a press release from Viridian Dynamics. Richard, felt a knot of pure dread tighten in his stomach. He fumbled for his own phone, his fingers suddenly clumsy. He brought up the news alert, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. For immediate release, Viridian Dynamics acquires Northridge property for Phase 1 of Terra Initiative. The headline swam before his eyes. He read it again, and then a third time, the words refusing to make sense. Northridge. His Northridge. The land deal that was supposed to be his legacy, the cornerstone of his entire professional life. The press release went on, quoting Alastair Finch. The 10,000-acre Northridge parcel represents a unique opportunity. Its topography and natural resources make it the ideal location for the first fully integrated Terra community, a blueprint for sustainable living for the 21st century. We are excited to break ground in the coming months. Richard looked up from his phone, his face pale and slack with shock. He stared at Alastair, then at Eleanor. How? He croaked, the single word barely audible. We were in final negotiations. We had the inside track. The deal was supposed to close next week. Alastair Finch took a sip of his water, his composure absolute. He looked at Richard with an expression that was almost pitying. You were in negotiations with the Landowners Consortium, Richard, a group of families who have owned that land for generations. You offered them money. You saw the land as a commodity, a blank slate for you to build your gaudy McMansions. He gestured with his glass towards Eleanor, a gesture of profound respect. Eleanor saw it differently. She didn't see a blank slate. She saw a complex ecosystem. She spent months walking that land, studying the watershed, the migratory bird patterns, the old-growth forests. She didn't present the consortium with a lowball offer and a tacky artist's rendering. She presented them with a vision. Eleanor spoke, then her voice steady and clear, cutting through Richard's fog of confusion. They didn't want to just sell their heritage, Richard. They wanted to see it preserved and honored. I showed them how we could build within the landscape, not on top of it. How we could use geothermal energy from the natural hot springs you never bothered to survey. How a research and education center dedicated to the local ecology could be funded by the project, employing their children and grandchildren for generations. I showed them a future. You showed them a subdivision. The full, horrifying picture began to assemble itself in Richard's mind. While he had been whining and dining, investors boasting about his impending triumph, Eleanor had been quietly, intelligently, and methodically dismantling it from the ground up. She had used the very skills he'd ridiculed: her eye for detail, her understanding of space and environment, her silly hobby, to outmaneuver him on the biggest deal of his life. Viridian Dynamics didn't just offer them more money. Alastair continued, his voice as sharp and final as a judge's gavel. We offered them a partnership and a legacy they could be proud of. They signed the exclusive sale agreement with us yesterday afternoon. The deal was funded and closed this morning. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Your bid was never even a serious contender. They were just using you to gauge the market rate. Humiliation washed over Richard in a sickening wave. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been played. He was a fool, a pawn in a game so far above his level that he hadn't even seen the board. Robert Croft grabbed Richard's arm, his fingers digging in like talons. Our primary investors, our credit lines, everything was leveraged against this deal, Richard. He hissed, his face purple with rage. We're ruined. The firm is ruined. Richard stumbled back away from the accusation in his partner's eyes, away from the pity in Alastair's, away from the serene, unassailable strength on Eleanor's face. He looked at Tiffany, and for the first time he saw her clearly. Her face was a mask of cold calculation. The adoration was gone, replaced by a frantic assessment of her own situation. She was looking at him, not as her fiancé, but as a bad investment. A stock that had just crashed to zero. The final piece of his world crumbled. It wasn't just his business that was gone. It was the entire flimsy facade. The crowd was now openly staring their whispers, no longer hushed but buzzing with the delicious, brutal gossip of his spectacular downfall. He was no longer the king of the gala. He was the court jester, stripped bare in the center of the room, his own arrogance the instrument of his destruction. The rest of the gala was a blur of muted colors and distorted sounds for Richard. He felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, not with admiration, but with a morbid curiosity reserved for car crashes. Robert Croft had already abandoned him, huddling in a corner with other board members, their faces grim as they frantically tapped on their phones, no doubt trying to assess the scale of the damage. Tiffany detached her hand from his arm. I think I need some air, she mumbled, not looking at him. She didn't walk. She fled, disappearing into the crowd, a golden retriever abandoning a sinking ship. Richard knew, with a certainty, that chilled him to the bone, that he would never see her again, except perhaps in the tabloids with her next benefactor. He was alone, utterly and completely alone in the wreckage of his own making. Across the room, Eleanor and Alistair didn't gloat. There was no triumphant toast, no pointed glances in his direction. After speaking briefly with a few other guests, who now approached them with a newfound reverence, they simply turned and walked towards the exit, their departure as graceful and understated as their arrival. They hadn't come for revenge. Revenge was beneath them. They had come to attend a gala, conduct a piece of business, and continue with their lives that had simply and consequentially eclipsed his. As they stepped out into the cool night air, the scent of jasmine from the club's gardens filled Eleanor's senses. The chaos of the ballroom felt a world away. The chauffeur held the door of the Rolls-Royce open for them. Inside the car was a cocoon of silence and luxury. The city lights slid past the windows as they pulled away from the country club, leaving the ruin of Richard's life behind them. Eleanor let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She wasn't giddy or triumphant. She felt calm. The final chain linking her to her past, a chain of insecurity and self-doubt that Richard had forged, had finally been broken. Alistair reached over and took her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She turned to him, a genuine, unburdened smile gracing her lips for the first time that night. "I am," she said, "better than all right. Thank you, Alistair, for believing in me." "Eleanor," he said, his expression serious, "I want to be very clear. I didn't do any of this for you. I did it with you. The Northridge vision was entirely yours. Your intelligence, your empathy, your unique perspective, that is what won that deal. I just provided the capital to make it a reality. This victory is yours, and yours alone." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of release. He saw her. He truly saw her, not as an extension of himself or as someone to be saved, but as a brilliant and capable partner. "So," she said, her voice thick with emotion as she squeezed his hand, "what's next for Vance Design Studios and Viridian Dynamics?" Alistair smiled, his eyes lighting up with the familiar spark of enthusiasm she had come to love. "I was looking at that satellite imagery of the Atacama Desert you sent me," he began. "Your concept for harvesting atmospheric moisture for the cooling systems. I think it's time we started sketching out phase 2. As the limousine sped them towards a future of their own design, a future filled with innovation, respect, and shared purpose. Richard Sterling stood frozen in the club's parking lot. His valet had brought his car around a gleaming red Maserati he'd bought to impress Tiffany. Now it just looked garish and pathetic. He had traded in a life of substance for one of style, and now he had neither. He had everything he thought he ever wanted, and in the end it amounted to nothing at all. He got into the car, the engine roaring to life with a hollow promise of power, and drove off into a future he had never planned for one where he was completely and irrevocably irrelevant. 3 weeks after the gala, the autumn air turned crisp, stripping the leaves from the oak trees that lined Richard Sterling's once prestigious street. The change in season was a fitting metaphor for his own life, which had been stripped bare with a brutal, astonishing speed. The red Maserati was gone, repossessed by a finance company that was unsympathetic to his sudden financial ruin. His house, a cavernous testament to his former ego, was now an echo chamber of failure. For sale signs dotted the manicured lawn like tombstones. The dissolution of Sterling and Croft had been a bloodbath. When the Northridge deal collapsed, it triggered a cascade of covenant breaches on their loans. The firm leveraged to the hilt folded in less than a week. Robert Croft, in a masterful act of self-preservation, had painted Richard as a reckless, egotistical rogue operator in his depositions, sacrificing his junior partner to the horde of furious investors. Lawsuits were piling up, each one a paper and ink monument to his hubris. He now spent his days in a rented, soul-crushingly beige office above a laundromat, the scent of fabric softener, a constant, cloying reminder of his new station. He wasn't building empires anymore. He was fielding calls from bankruptcy lawyers and negotiating settlements with creditors who wanted their pound of flesh. His former friends from the country club no longer answered his calls. He had been excommunicated from the world that had once worshipped him. His evenings were the worst. Alone in the echoing house with takeout boxes for company, he would torture himself by searching the internet. Tiffany had wasted no time. She was already being photographed on the arm of a German industrialist, looking radiant on a yacht in Monaco. The gossip columns dubbed her a survivor, a woman who had narrowly escaped the clutches of a disgraced financier. The irony was a bitter pill he was forced to swallow every night. But his most obsessive searches were for two names, Eleanor Vance and Alastair Finch. They were everywhere. Forbes ran a cover story titled The Visionaries, featuring a stunning photograph of them standing on a windswept hill, blueprints in hand. The article wasn't about their romance. It was about their professional synergy, hailing Vance Design Studios as the most disruptive force in architecture in a generation. Architectural Digest did a 10-page spread on Eleanor's design philosophy, showcasing her past projects and the breathtaking initial concepts for the terror community at Northridge. They called her style empathetic architecture, a term that made Richard sneer, even as a part of him felt a grudging pang of understanding. One Tuesday morning, he saw an announcement for a groundbreaking ceremony at the Northridge site. It was a private event for investors and press only. An image accompanied the article, Eleanor in a hard hat and practical boots, laughing with a group of engineers, her face alight with genuine passion. She looked younger, more vibrant and more confident than he had ever seen her. She was in her element, not as a hostess or a wife, but as a creator, a leader. Seeing her like that so thoroughly, her own person was a deeper wound than losing his company or his fortune. He had possessed the frame, but he had never once understood the masterpiece within it. A desperate, irrational idea began to form in his mind. He needed to see her, not to beg or apologize, his pride wouldn't allow it. He needed to see if the woman in those photographs was real. He needed to puncture the myth to find a crack in her new, perfect life. He needed to believe that somewhere underneath the success and the billionaire was the quiet, pliable Eleanor he had once controlled. He found out from a small local blog that she frequented a particular artisan coffee shop in a trendy, revitalized neighborhood downtown, not far from her new offices. It was the kind of place he'd once mocked all reclaimed wood and single-origin beans. Now it felt like enemy territory. He waited for 2 days, sitting in his sensible second-hand sedan across the street, feeling like a private detective in a cheap novel. On the third day, he saw her. She arrived not in a Rolls-Royce, but in a modest electric car, and she was alone. She wore simple black trousers, a soft cashmere sweater, and her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked like any other successful professional, grabbing her morning coffee. He took a deep breath, got out of his car, and walked in. The bell above the door chimed, and her head lifted from the laptop she had open on a small table. Her eyes met his. There was a flicker of surprise, nothing more. No fear, no anger. It was the calm, distant recognition of a near stranger. "Richard," she said, her voice even. She didn't invite him to sit. "Eleanor." He began trying to summon his old, easy charm. It felt like a poorly fitting suit. "Fancy meeting you here. This is, your new spot." "Sometimes," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have a meeting nearby." The message was clear. "I'm busy. Don't waste my time." He gestured vaguely at her laptop. "So, this is it. The big headquarters of Vance Design. A coffee shop." He meant it as a light-hearted jab, an echo of their old dynamic, but it landed with a thud. "My office is 3 blocks away, Richard. It has 30 employees and a view of the entire city. This," she said, tapping her laptop, "is where I come to think. You'll recall I was never allowed a space to do that in the house we shared." The directness of the blow caught him off guard. The older Eleanor would have absorbed the barb, offered a placating smile. This Eleanor returned it sharpened and precise. He floundered, changing tactics. "Look, Elle, what happened? With the firm, with everything. It was a disaster. I'm ruined." He laid his vulnerability bare, hoping to elicit a spark of the sympathy she had once given him so freely. She looked at him, her head tilted slightly, an expression of clinical assessment on her face. "Yes," she said. "I read about it. It sounded difficult." Difficult. The word was so mild, so detached, it was more insulting than any curse. It was the word one would use to describe a puzzle, not a man's complete and utter ruin. He realized with a sinking heart that she felt nothing for his plight. He was a headline she had skimmed. A desperate, ugly anger began to bubble up inside him. "You did this," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You and your billionaire boyfriend. You set out to destroy me." Eleanor closed her laptop with a soft final click. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw a glimmer of emotion in her eyes. It wasn't anger, it was pity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "This was never about you, Richard. North Ridge wasn't a weapon to use against you. It was a project I believed in. Alistair's involvement wasn't a plot to ruin you. It was a partnership born from mutual respect for a vision. You were a business obstacle, nothing more. Your ruin wasn't the goal, it was an incidental consequence of your own poor business practices and your profound underestimation of the market. And of me." She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. She was preparing to leave. He was being dismissed. "You couldn't have done it without his money." He spat, his last desperate gambit. "Don't pretend you're some self-made genius. He bought you this new life." Eleanor paused and looked at him one last time. There was no pity left in her eyes now, only a clear, cold finality. "Alistair's money was the amplifier, Richard," she said, her words striking him like stones. "But the idea, the vision, the design, that was the signal. You lived with the source of that signal for 15 years. You had every opportunity to listen, to engage, to collaborate. But you chose to turn it off, to mock it, to tell it that it was just a silly little hobby. You can't blame the man who finally thought the signal was worth amplifying." She turned and walked away without another word. Through the coffee shop window, Richard watched as Alistair Finch pulled up to the curb. He wasn't driving the Rolls-Royce, but a simple, dark Tesla. He got out, opened the passenger door for Eleanor, and greeted her with a warm, loving smile. They exchanged a few words, and she laughed a sound Richard couldn't hear, but could feel in his bones, a laugh of pure, unadulterated happiness. They drove away, merging into the city traffic, moving on to their future. Richard Sterling remained standing in the middle of the coffee shop, his own coffee growing cold on a distant table. He was finally completely alone with the truth. He hadn't been destroyed by his ex-wife's revenge or a billionaire's power. He had been rendered obsolete by his own blindness. He was a ghost from a life that no longer existed, haunting a world that had already forgotten his name. Eleanor's story is a powerful reminder that true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. Richard saw her as a forgotten accessory, but he failed to see the architect of her own destiny hiding in plain sight. Her success wasn't about revenge. It was the natural outcome of reclaiming her power, her talent, and her self-worth. It's a testament to the fact that the most powerful empires are not built on money or ego, but on vision, integrity, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. She didn't need to tear him down. She just needed to build her own world so high that his became an insignificant speck below. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey? Have you ever felt underestimated in your own life? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We love hearing from you. What happens when the man who swore to love you forever discards you like last season's fashion? What do you do when he not only cheats, but has the audacity to text you by mistake that his new flame is an upgrade? For Cassandra Davenport, the answer wasn't tears or despair. It was a cold, calculated fury that money could fuel and revenge could satisfy. This isn't just a story about a broken heart. It's a story about a woman who was underestimated, a man who was blinded by arrogance, and a multi-million-dollar lesson in what it truly means to be upgraded. The end of Cassandra and Leo Fordham's marriage didn't come with a thunderous crash, but with the quiet, unassuming buzz of a cell phone left on a bedside table. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of brilliantly ordinary day that lulls you into a false sense of security. Sunlight smelling of freshly cut grass from the gardener's work below their penthouse apartment streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Cassandra, at 32, possessed a quiet elegance that was often mistaken for fragility. She had the kind of inherited grace that came from generations of old money, but she'd worked hard to shed the skin of a Davenport heiress to become simply Mrs. Fordham. She had wanted a real life, a real marriage built on love and mutual respect, not on the foundation of her family's formidable fortune. She managed a small, independent art gallery downtown, a passion project that gave her a sense of purpose outside the towering shadow of her family's real estate empire. Leo, charming and ambitious, had been her escape. A senior analyst at a prestigious investment firm, he had the hunger and drive that she, having never needed to strive for anything, found intoxicating. He'd pursued her with a relentless, all-consuming passion that made her feel seen for herself, not for her last name. He'd promised her a world they would build together brick by brick, his ambition and her heart as the mortar. For 7 years, she believed in that promise. She hosted his work dinners, charmed his bosses, and celebrated his every promotion as if it were her own. She kept her own vast resources at a polite distance, wanting him to feel like the provider, the man of the house. She loved him, utterly foolishly, and as it turned out, blindly. That Tuesday, Leo was in the shower, the hiss of hot water, a familiar soundtrack to their mornings. His phone, lying next to a half-empty glass of water, buzzed again. It was a message notification. Usually she respected his privacy, but a flicker of something intuition, perhaps, or the slow, dawning poison of suspicion that had been seeping into her heart for months, made her glance at the screen. The sender was Bianca Reed. The name was unfamiliar. The message preview was damningly clear. Bianca Reed last night was insane. Can't stop thinking about you. You really are the full package. When do I get to see my man again? The air in Cassandra's lungs turned to ice. It was a physical sensation, a painful freezing of her blood that started in her chest and spread to the tips of her fingers. Her breath hitched. My man. The words echoed in the silent, sun-drenched room. She stood motionless, her hand hovering over the phone. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, to walk away, to pretend she hadn't seen it. But she couldn't. With a trembling finger, she unlocked the phone. Leo, in his infinite carelessness, had never bothered to change the passcode from their anniversary date. There it was, a thread of messages stretching back months, explicit photos, lavish promises, conversations filled with a passion and excitement that had long faded from her own marriage. They talked about trips, about a future, about how much better life was without the ball and chain. But it was the message Leo had sent just last night, after a charity gala they had attended together, that broke her. Cassandra had felt beautiful that night in a sapphire gown that matched her eyes. Leo had been attentive, his hand on the small of her back. It had felt for a fleeting moment like old times. A lie. It had all been a lie. She scrolled up to his sent messages, and there it was, a message clearly intended for Bianca that he must have accidentally sent to a group chat with his work friends before deleting it. But one of them, a man named Derek, had screenshotted it and sent it back to him with a string of laughing emojis. The screenshot was what Cassandra was now staring at. Leo Fordham. Dude, you saw her? Bianca is a total upgrade. Younger, hotter, and she actually appreciates what it takes to be a winner. Cassie is classic, like a vintage car. Beautiful to look at, but you don't want it as your daily driver. Upgrade. The word slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the dismissal. The calculated cruelty. 7 years of her life, her love, her support, reduced to a vintage cum. She had intentionally parked her Rolls-Royce life to be his supportive Ford sedan, and he had the audacity to call another woman a sleeker model. The sound of the shower turning off snapped her back to reality. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, trapped bird. She placed the phone back on the nightstand exactly as it was. Her hands were surprisingly steady. The initial shock was morphing, solidifying into something cold, hard, and heavy in her gut. It felt like a block of granite settling where her heart used to be. Leo walked out of the bathroom, a towel slung low on his hips, steam billowing around him. He smiled, the easy, confident smile that had once made her weak in the knees. Now it looked like a mask. Morning, beautiful, he said, leaning in to kiss her. Cassandra turned her head slightly, so his lips brushed her cheek instead of her mouth. She felt a wave of revulsion so strong it almost made her get. Morning, she replied, her voice a monotone she didn't recognize. You have a message? He glanced at the phone, then back at her, a flicker of something panic in his eyes. He snatched it up. She watched as he read the message from Bianca, his thumb moving quickly as he typed a reply. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't seem to care that she was watching. The arrogance was breathtaking. So she began, her voice dangerously quiet. Who is Bianca Reed? Leo didn't even flinch. He set the phone down and began to dry his hair, with another towel, his movements deliberate. Look, Cass, I was going to talk to you about this. Were you? The question was laced with ice. When after you booked your next romantic getaway with your upgrade, his head snapped up. The charming mask fell away, revealing the cold, hard man underneath. You went through my phone. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. You left it on the nightstand. She countered, her gaze unwavering. You called me a vintage car, Leo. Something beautiful to look at, but not what you want to drive every day. He had the decency to look momentarily ashamed, but it passed quickly, replaced by a defensive anger. It wasn't supposed to be for you to see. It was a stupid guy talk thing. And the months of messages, the photos, the plans for a future, was that all guy talk too? He sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. It was a gesture of performative frustration, as if she were the one being unreasonable. This wasn't working, Cassie. Can you honestly say you've been happy? You're always content. You're placid. I need fire. I need ambition. Bianca gets that. She's hungry like me. Hungry. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. You think I don't have ambition? Leo, I stepped back so you could shine. I hosted your clients, I edited your reports, I put my own life on hold so you could build yours. My family could have bought and sold your entire firm 10 times over, but I wanted us. I wanted the life you promised me. See, there it is, he exclaimed, pointing at her. The Davenport money. It's always there, isn't it? The safety net. You've never had to really fight for anything in your life. I have. Bianca has. We're cut from the same cloth. The hypocrisy was staggering. He condemned her for the very safety net he had so comfortably enjoyed for 7 years. The penthouse, the vacations, the seamless, worry-free existence. All of it was subtly underwritten by the Davenport name, a fact he was now conveniently forgetting. So that's it then, she asked, her voice hollow. 7 years and you're throwing it away for a hotter model? It's more than that, he said, his voice softening into a condescending purr. It's a different energy. We're just on different paths, Cass. I'm on a rocket ship and you're happy in your garden. There's no shame in that. But I can't stay in the garden with you. He was framing it as if he were doing her a favor, releasing her into a tranquil life she supposedly craved. He was rewriting their history to cast himself as the dynamic hero and her as the complacent, boring wife. Cassandra just stared at him. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by this cruel, self-serving stranger. The love she had felt for him curdled into something bitter and unrecognizable. Get out, she said the words barely a whisper. What? Get out. This time her voice was stronger, edged with steel. Pack your things. I want you gone by the time I get back from the gallery. He actually scoffed. Our apartment, you mean? Don't be dramatic. My apartment, she corrected him, a flicker of the Davenport authority returning to her. Bought with my money from my trust, as you well know. Your name is on the lease as a resident, not a co-owner. You have 30 minutes to pack a bag. I'll have the rest of your things sent to your office. Or would you prefer I send them to Bianca Reed? I'm sure I can find her address. For the first time, real fear flashed in his eyes. The fear of losing access. The fear of his rocket ship running out of fuel, her fuel. He started to protest, to argue, but she held up a hand. Don't, Leo. Don't say another word. Just go. He stared at her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time, not the gentle, accommodating Cassie, but the heiress she was born to be. He saw the granite in her eyes and knew he had pushed too far. He had miscalculated. He had assumed her love was unconditional and her spine was made of jelly. He was wrong. Without another word, he turned, grabbed a duffel bag from the walk-in closet, and began throwing his designer suits and expensive watches into it, with angry, jerky movements. Cassandra walked out of the bedroom and into the vast living room. Her body began to tremble, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a deep seismic shock. She wrapped her arms around herself, sinking onto the plush white sofa. The sun was still streaming in, the day still brilliantly, cruelly ordinary. Her life, the one she had so carefully built, had been demolished in the span of 10 minutes. She laid her head back, closed her eyes, and for the first time allowed a single hot tear to trace a path down her cheek. It was a tear not of sadness, but of rage. An upgrade. He'd called his mistress an upgrade. A strange, cold clarity began to dawn in her mind. Fine. He wanted an upgrade. She would show him what a real upgrade looked like. He thought she was a vintage car. He had no idea what kind of engine she had under the hood. The Fordham chapter of her life was over. The Davenport chapter was about to begin. Later that afternoon, after Leo was gone and the silence of the penthouse was deafening, a wave of nausea washed over her. She chalked it up to stress and grief. It happened again the next morning, and the morning after that. A small, persistent thought began to nag at the back of her mind. She counted the weeks. With a dawning sense of disbelief, she realized she was late. Her hands shook as she opened the pregnancy test 2 days later. She sat on the cold marble floor of her bathroom, waiting for the 3 longest minutes of her life to pass. She didn't know what she wanted the result to be. Part of her prayed it was negative, a clean break. Another part, a deeper, more primal part, yearned for it to be true. She finally picked up the stick. 2 stark pink lines. Pregnant. She was pregnant with the child of the man who had shattered her heart and called her obsolete. All the cold fury, all the plans for revenge, suddenly felt insignificant next to this. Another wave of nausea hit her, but this time it wasn't from grief. It was morning sickness. A new life was growing inside her, a life she would have to protect. Her resolve, which had been hardening since that fateful morning, now solidified into diamond. This was no longer just about her pride. It was about her child's future. It was about ensuring that Leo Fordham, the man who saw people as assets to be traded and upgraded, would never underestimate her or her child again. Her revenge would not just be swift and satisfying. It would be generational. It would be legendary. The first phone call Cassandra made was not to her parents or her friends, but to a number she hadn't dialed in years. It was the private line of Alistair Finch, the man who had served as her father's most trusted legal counsel and consigliere for over 40 years. Mr. Finch was a relic from a different era, a man who wore 3-piece suits, communicated in crisp, precise sentences, and possessed a mind like a steel trap. He had managed the Davenport family's most complex acquisitions and fiercest legal battles with a placid, almost unnerving calm. Cassandra. He said, his voice a gravelly baritone that held no surprise, as if he had been expecting her call. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Alistair?" she said, her voice steady. "I need your help. It's a corporate matter." An hour later, she was sitting in his cavernous wood-panelled office overlooking Central Park. The air smelled of old leather paper and Earl Grey tea. Mr. Finch sat opposite her, his hands steepled, his pale blue eyes watching her with unnerving perception. He had already been briefed by her father, who she'd called immediately after, but he wanted to hear it from her. She told him everything. The text message, the confrontation, the cruel, dismissive words, the pregnancy. She left out none of the humiliating details, laying her pain bare on the polished surface of his mahogany desk. She did not cry. Her voice did not waver. She spoke with the cold precision of a CEO outlining a hostile takeover. When she finished, Finch was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "And what is it you want, Cassandra?" he finally asked. "I want to bankrupt him," she said, the words tasting like acid. "I want to ruin his career. I want him to know what it feels like to be discarded." Finch nodded slowly. A scorched earth approach. Understandable, emotional, but ultimately unsatisfying and messy. Public divorces and career sabotage can backfire. They make you look vindictive, not powerful. Revenge, my dear girl, is a dish best served cold, but more importantly, it should be served on a silver platter of your own making. "What are you suggesting?" Leo Fordham's mistake was not just infidelity, Finch explained, leaning forward slightly. His cardinal sin was arrogance. He believes he is a self-made man, a winner. He has attached himself to this new woman, Bianca Reed, because she reflects this image back at him. They are living a life of performative success. Flaunting it, I presume. Cassandra nodded, thinking of the social media posts she'd forced herself to look at. Leo and Bianca, clinking champagne glasses on a rooftop bar. Bianca showing off a new diamond bracelet, captioning it, "Spoiled by my man." Their location tags were a tour of Manhattan's most exclusive hotspots. For the past week, they seemed to have taken up semi-permanent residence at one place in particular, the Grand Majestic Hotel on Fifth Avenue. It was an iconic old-world establishment known for its opulent suites and discerning clientele. It was also where Leo had proposed to her. The irony was a bitter pill. "They're staying at the Grand Majestic," she said, her voice tight. A slow smile spread across Alistair Finch's thin lips. It was a terrifying sight. Oh, are they now? How perfect, perfect, the grand, majestic Finch mused, looking out the window. A fine establishment, part of the Sterling Hospitality Group, a publicly traded company. Their stock has been underperforming lately. Board is getting restless. Rumors of a shake-up. He turned his gaze back to her. Leo believes his power comes from his job, his perceived wealth. But that's not true power. Real power is ownership. It's the ability to change the rules of the game because you own the entire board. A spark ignited in Cassandra's mind. You want me to buy Sterling Hospitality stock? No. Cassandra Finch, said the smile, widening. That's what Leo would do. A small, clever play. You are a Davenport. You don't play. You conquer. We are going to buy the hotel. Cassandra stared at him, stunned. Buy the Grand Majestic. The whole hotel, precisely. Not through a public bid. That's too slow, too noisy. The Davenport Corporation, through one of its subsidiary holding companies, will make a direct private offer to the board of Sterling Hospitality. An offer so overwhelmingly generous for this one specific underperforming asset that they would be fiscally irresponsible not to accept it. It will be quiet. It will be fast. And by the time the ink is dry, you, Cassandra Davenport, will be the sole proprietor of the Grand Majestic Hotel. The sheer audacity of the plan took her breath away. It was brilliant. It was devastating. It wasn't just revenge. It was a masterclass in power. Leo was playing checkers in the hotel bar, and she was about to buy the building it was in. He will be living in my house, she whispered, the realization dawning on her. As your guest, Finch corrected gently. And guests, as we know, are subject to the rules of the house. For the next 2 weeks, Cassandra threw herself into the plan with a ferocity she hadn't felt in years. This was the world she was born into, the language of leveraged buyouts and holding companies she had learned at her father's knee. It felt like coming home. She worked out of a private office at Davenport Tower, a space that had been waiting for her. She and Finch and a team of the family's most ruthless analysts worked around the clock. They dissected Sterling Hospitality's financials. They drafted the offer, structuring it to be irresistible. They used a shell corporation based in Delaware with a name so bland, Asset Management Services, LLC, that it would raise no flags. Cassandra was a ghost in the machine, her name appearing nowhere on the initial paperwork. While she was building an empire, Leo was building a fantasy. His social media was a curated highlight reel of his new life. Photos of him and Bianca at the hotel's exclusive rooftop pool, videos of them dining at Le Ciel, the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant. Bianca's Instagram was a deluge of designer shopping bags, all artfully arranged on the bed of their suite. Suite 1201, the Imperial Suite. The same suite where Leo had once scattered rose petals and asked Cassandra to be his wife. He was actively, publicly desecrating their shared memories, replacing them with a shinier, newer version. Each post was a small, sharp stab to Cassandra's heart, but with each stab, the granite inside her grew harder, her resolve more absolute. She saw the life he was projecting, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the Hermes bag on Bianca's arm. He was spending lavishly, desperately, trying to project an image of a man who had made it on his own terms. Cassandra knew better. He was burning through his savings and maxing out his credit cards. His salary was substantial, but it couldn't sustain that level of performative wealth for long. He was on a rocket ship, all right, one that was about to run out of fuel and come crashing back to Earth. The day the deal closed, Cassandra was in Finch's office again. The final wire transfer, a sum with enough zeros to make her head spin, had been sent. A courier delivered a thick portfolio of documents. Finch slid the top one across the desk to her. It was the deed. There, in crisp black ink, was the name of the new owner of the Grand Majestic Hotel Asset Management Services, LLC. And on the signatory page for the LC, there was only one name, Cassandra Davenport. She ran her fingers over her own signature. A tremor of pure, unadulterated power coursed through her. She looked out the window down at the sprawling city below. She was 3 months pregnant, her body just beginning to change. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach. Phase 1 is complete, Finch said, pouring them both glasses of sparkling water. What's your first move as the new proprietor? Ms. Davenport Cassandra took a sip of water, the bubbles fizzing on her tongue. She thought of Leo and Bianca, likely lounging by the pool in her hotel at this very moment, blissfully unaware that the ground had just shifted beneath their feet. My first move, Alistair, she said, a predatory smile touching her lips for the first time in weeks, is a personal inspection. I think it's time for the new owner to meet the staff. And then, I think it's time we made some adjustments to the guest experience. The Grand Majestic Hotel was a symphony of hushed opulence. Its lobby was a grand, cavernous space with floors of polished Italian marble, soaring columns, and a magnificent crystal chandelier that dripped light like frozen diamonds. The air was perfumed with the scent of fresh lilies, their fragrance mingling with the faint, expensive smell of leather and old money. Cassandra walked in, not as a guest, but as a conqueror. She wore a tailored navy blue dress that was professional and severe, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon. She was flanked by Alistair Finch and two senior executives from the Davenport Corporation. Her presence commanded attention. The concierge, a man named Jean-Pierre, who had been at the hotel for 30 years, straightened his posture instinctively. "May I help you, madam?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm here to see the general manager, Mr. Harrison," Cassandra said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Tell him Cassandra Davenport is here." The name Davenport worked like a master key. Doors opened, people scurried. Within minutes, they were being escorted to the top floor to the lavish executive offices. Robert Harrison was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed with a permanently worried expression that came from decades of catering to the whims of the ultra-rich. He greeted them with a professional smile, but his eyes darted nervously between Cassandra and Finch. He had been told that morning in a terse, legally binding email that the hotel had been sold and the new owner would be arriving for an inspection. He had expected a corporate delegation, not a young woman whose family name was synonymous with New York real estate royalty. Ms. Davenport, Mr. Finch. An unexpected honor. Harrison began gesturing to the chairs in his office. "Welcome to the Grand Majestic. We were only just informed of the transition." "The transition is effective immediately," Robert Finch said, taking the lead. "Ms. Davenport is the sole proprietor. All operational command now flows directly from her." Harrison's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. I and my staff are entirely at your disposal. Ms. Davenport, what is your vision for the hotel? Are there any immediate changes you wish to implement?" Cassandra leaned forward, her hands clasped on the polished desk. "My vision is for excellence, Mr. Harrison. Unparalleled service. Absolute discretion. And I believe the best way to ensure that standard is to understand the details of the operation myself. Starting with our current guest list." She paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "I believe we have a Mr. Leo Fordham and a Ms. Bianca Reed staying in the Imperial Suite, 1201. Is that correct?" Harrison consulted his computer. "Yes, that's correct. Mr. Fordham is a long-term guest, booked for the next month." "Excellent," Cassandra said, a chill in her voice. "I want to begin by making their stay unforgettable. But first, a few new house rules. Effective immediately, my authority overrides all existing reservations and guest preferences. My instructions are to be followed to the letter without question and with the utmost discretion. No one is to know the hotel has a new owner until I decide to announce it. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Ms. Davenport," Harrison said, already sensing the tectonic shift in power. "Good," Cassandra replied. "Now regarding Mr. Fordham and Ms. Reed, I believe they have a dinner reservation at Le Ciel tonight at 8 p.m. Yes, their usual table by the window. Cancel it, Cassandra said simply. Tell them there was a booking error. The restaurant is completely full. Find them the worst table in the hotel's secondary bistro instead. Near the kitchen doors, perhaps. Harrison blinked. Miss Davenport, Mr. Fordham is a very vocal guest. I'm counting on it, she said. Also, I noticed they have a couple's massage scheduled at the spa tomorrow morning. Yes, the VIP suite. A pipe has burst in the spa's VP suite, Cassandra said, her face a mask of stone. A terrible shame. All appointments there are cancelled for the foreseeable future. I'm sure they can squeeze into the public sauna. One by one, she began to dismantle their perfect, curated world. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. That evening, Leo and Bianca descended from their suite, dressed for a grand dinner. Bianca was in a glittering backless gold dress, her phone already in hand, ready to document their fabulous meal. Leo, exuding confidence, strode up to the hostess at Le Ciel. Fordham party of 2, he announced. The hostess, a young woman who had been thoroughly briefed by Mr. Harrison, gave him a polite, apologetic smile. I'm so sorry, sir, but I don't seem to have a reservation under that name. That's impossible, Leo scoffed. I have a standing reservation. We were here 2 nights ago. Check again. I have checked, sir. There seems to have been a system glitch. We are completely booked for a private event this evening. Leo's face began to flush with anger. This is unacceptable. Get me the manager. The manager appeared, repeated the same story with practiced regret, and offered them a complimentary table at the Garden Cafe downstairs as a gesture of goodwill. Defeated and fuming, Leo had no choice but to accept. They were led to a small, cramped table wedged between a service station and the swinging doors of the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans providing the soundtrack to their meal. Bianca's face was a thundercloud. There would be no Instagram post tonight. The next morning, their spa appointment was cancelled due to the mysterious burst pipe. The super-fast premium Wi-Fi in their suite suddenly slowed to a crawl, making it impossible for Bianca to upload her stories or for Leo to conduct his video calls for work. When he called the front desk to complain, he was met with a maddeningly cheerful but utterly unhelpful response. We're experiencing network-wide issues, sir. Our technicians are working on it. We appreciate your patience. The small inconveniences began to mount. The room service orders were consistently wrong. A steak ordered medium rare arrived well done. A bottle of expensive champagne was inexplicably replaced with Prosecco. Their laundry was returned a day late. Each incident was small enough to be plausible deniability, a simple mistake, but together they formed a pattern of frustrating, targeted incompetence. Leo's famous charm began to fray. He was constantly on the phone with the front desk, his voice growing louder and more belligerent with each call. He saw it as a personal slight from an incompetent staff, a failure to recognize his importance. Bianca, whose entire existence was predicated on a seamless, luxurious aesthetic, was becoming increasingly agitated. This place has gone to the dogs. Leo, she complained, staring at her phone as it struggled to buffer a video. For what you're paying, this is a joke. Can't you do something? I'm trying. He'd snapped back, his own stress mounting. He had an important presentation coming up and was counting on the hotel's prestige and services to woo a potential client. The following week, Cassandra escalated her campaign. Leo and Bianca returned from a shopping spree on Fifth Avenue, their arms laden with bags from Gucci and Prada. As Leo went to pay for their taxi with the hotel's house account, the doorman stopped him. I'm sorry, Mr. Fordham, the doorman said, his face impassive. The front desk has informed us that your house charging privileges have been temporarily suspended pending a credit review. Leo froze. Oh, what? That's ridiculous. My card is on file. You'll have to speak with the front desk, sir. In the middle of the grand lobby, in front of a dozen other guests, Leo was forced to have a hushed, intense argument with the desk clerk. The clerk, a young man named Thomas, who had been personally promoted by Cassandra that morning, was polite but firm. "There appears to be an issue with the pre-authorization on your American Express, sir. It has been declined." Declined? Leo hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. "There is $500,000 of credit on that card. Run it again." "I have, sir. 3 times it's declined." "Perhaps you could try another card." The public humiliation was exquisite. Bianca watched her arms crossed, her perfectly manicured foot tapping impatiently. This was not the picture of the powerful, in-control man she had signed up for. Fumbling for his wallet, Leo pulled out another card, which was grudgingly accepted. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had been planted in Bianca's mind. Cassandra watched the whole scene from a security monitor in her new office, a small, satisfied smile on her face. Beside her, Mr. Harrison stood looking pale. "He is going to have a full-blown meltdown, Miss Davenport." "I certainly hope so," Robert Cassandra replied, taking a sip of her chamomile tea. "Phase 2 is about to begin. I believe Mr. Fordham has booked the main ballroom for a client presentation and cocktail party. Next Friday, yes. A very important event for him, I understand. He's trying to land the Oakhaven account." "Excellent," she said. "Make sure everything is perfect for his event. The best food, the best champagne, extra staff. Spare no expense. Let him believe he is finally getting the service he deserves." Harrison looked confused. "You want us to help him? I want him to feel confident." Cassandra clarified, her eyes gleaming with a cold fire. "I want him to feel like he is on top of the world, because the higher he climbs, the more devastating the fall will be. On Friday night, Robert I will be attending the party, and I will be introducing myself to his guest of honor. And then I'm going to have him evicted." The Grand Majestic's sovereign ballroom was not merely a room, it was a testament to enduring power. Tonight it had been molded to reflect the aspirations of one man, Leo Fordham. The vast space was bathed in a golden, buttery light from 3 colossal chandeliers, their thousands of crystals refracting the glow onto the faces of Manhattan's financial elite. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfume, and the hotel's signature white lilies, buzzed with the low hum of influential conversations. A string quartet, nestled in a velvet-draped alcove, played Vivaldi with a subdued elegance that served as the perfect sophisticated backdrop for the clinking of champagne flutes and the murmur of multi-million-dollar deals. At the gravitational center of this universe stood Leo. He was more than a host. He was a sun king in his court. Dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, he radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated triumph. Everything, after a week of inexplicable frustrations, had fallen perfectly into place. The hotel staff, once seemingly incompetent, now moved with a balletic grace, anticipating every need. His presentation to the Oakhaven Capital executives that afternoon had been a masterstroke of confidence and charisma. Now, all that remained was to seal the deal amidst this stunning display of his own success. He placed a proprietary hand on the small of Bianca Reed's back. She was his ultimate accessory, a living work of art in a crimson gown that seemed poured onto her flawless figure. She played her part to perfection, her laughter bright and melodious, her head tilted just so, looking at him with an adoration that fueled his already incandescent ego. For Bianca, this night was the ultimate validation. The brief, unpleasant turbulence of declined credit cards and faulty room service had been forgotten. This, the glamour, the power, the envy in the eyes of other women, was the reality she had invested in. This was Leo, the winner, proving his worth. "Incredible event," Fordham rumbled Mr. Peterson, the CEO of Oakhaven Capital. He was a man built like a bulldog with shrewd eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless ambitious young men. "You certainly know how to make an impression. This hotel, it's a statement in itself." Leo's smile was wide and genuine. Only the best for Oakhaven, sir. He said, his voice smooth as the aged Scotch in Peterson's glass. I consider the Grand Majestic my home away from home. The service is unparalleled. You just have to know how to command it. He felt a surge of satisfaction at that last line. He had commanded it, and the hotel had bent to his will. He was the master of this domain. He allowed his gaze to sweep across the room, a conqueror surveying his territory. He thought, for a fleeting, triumphant moment, of Cassandra. He pictured her in their old apartment, her apartment, now probably curled up with a book, living her quiet beige life. He felt a brief, condescending flicker of pity. She couldn't understand this world, this thrill. She was the safe harbor, and he was the battleship destined for glorious combat on the open sea. He had made the right choice. Bianca was his future. This party was his coronation. He felt utterly, completely invincible. It was then that the atmosphere in the ballroom began to shift. It wasn't a sudden change, but a slow, subtle alteration in the ambient energy, like a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. It started near the grand double doors at the entrance. Conversations closest to the entryway faltered for a beat. Heads turned. A ripple of whispers began to spread inward, moving through the crowd like a silent current. Into the golden light stepped Cassandra Davenport. She was a vision in black. Where Bianca was a fiery, attention-seeking spectacle, Cassandra was a cool, dark void of elegance that drew all light into it. Her gown was deceptively simple, a column of midnight silk that fell to the floor without embellishment. Her only jewelry was a river of diamonds around her neck, a piece so magnificent it silenced all other attempts at adornment in the room. Her hair was swept back, revealing the clean, proud lines of her face, and her expression was one of serene, unnerving calm. She wasn't entering a party. She was taking possession of a space. She was flanked by Alistair Finch, his silver hair and stoic presence lending her an additional layer of gravitas. They didn't rush. They paused for a moment, their eyes scanning the room, two predators identifying their prey. Leo saw her. The champagne flute in his hand felt suddenly slick with sweat. His heart gave a painful lurch, a violent, sickening thud against his ribs. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost more vibrant and alive than anyone else in the room. What was she doing here? His mind raced, scrambling for an explanation. Was she trying to make a scene? Beg him to come back? The arrogance was so ingrained that even in his shock, he assumed her presence must revolve around him. But she wasn't looking at him. Her gaze swept past him as if he were part of the furniture. Her target was clear. With a calm, deliberate pace, she began to move through the room, a path parting before her, as guests, recognizing the Davenport name and the power it represented, stepped aside. She was heading directly for Mr. Peterson. Peterson, a contemporary of her father's, watched her approach, his gruff expression softening into one of genuine warmth and surprise. He'd known Cassie since she was a girl, attending these functions on her father's arm. "Cassie, my dear girl." What a pleasant surprise, he boomed, his voice cutting through the nervous quiet. He took her hand, patting it warmly. "I haven't seen you since that fundraiser in the Hamptons. You look wonderful. Your father must be very proud." "Miss Peterson, it's lovely to see you," Cassandra said. Her voice was perfectly modulated, carrying easily across the space without her having to raise it. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to. "I hope you're enjoying the evening. I trust my staff is taking good care of you." The question landed. Peterson's bushy eyebrows shot up. He looked from Cassandra's placid face to the impeccable waiters and back again. The proprietary tone was unmistakable. "Your staff?" He asked the single word, dripping with curiosity and dawning realization. Leo felt the blood drain from his face. He finally moved, stumbling forward, as if breaking free from a trance, his carefully constructed composure shattering. "Cassie." What is this? What are you doing here? Only then did she finally turn her gaze on him. It was not the look of a scorned woman, not angry, not hurt, not vengeful. It was worse. It was the detached, clinical look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope. It was a look of such profound, chilling indifference that it stripped him bare. "Leo," she said, her voice cool and even. "I should have known I'd find you here." She then turned back to Peterson, offering him a serene smile. "To answer your question, yes. Welcome to my hotel. I apologize for not greeting you sooner, but I wanted to ensure everything was running smoothly for my guests." The word guests was a perfectly aimed dart, and it hit its mark. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The string quartet had faltered into silence. Peterson's mind, sharp and accustomed to ruthless corporate plays, put the pieces together in an instant. He looked from the powerful, poised woman in front of him to the sputtering, panicked man beside him. You bought the Grand Majestic?" Peterson asked Cassandra, a new and profound respect dawning in his eyes. This wasn't just the Davenport heiress. This was a shark in her own right. "It was a recent acquisition," Cassandra replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "A passion project. I've always adored this building's potential." The implication was clear. The hotel, under its previous management, had been underperforming, just like everything else Leo touched. "But since you're here, Leo," she continued, turning her full attention back to him, the pleasantries over, "there are a few matters of housekeeping we need to discuss." She gave a subtle nod, and Mr. Harrison, the general manager, materialized at her side, his face a grim professional mask. He held a thick, leather-bound portfolio. "Robert, would you please bring me Mr. Fordham's bill?" The public nature of the request was a stunning act of aggression delivered with the politeness of a business inquiry. A wave of shocked murmurs and frantic whispers swept the room. Cell phones were being subtly angled to record the unfolding drama. Cassandra took the portfolio from Harrison and opened it. She didn't rush. She let the silence stretch, forcing every person in the room to focus on the humiliation she was about to administer. "Let's see," she mused, her fingertip tracing a line down the first page. "The Imperial Suite, number 1201. My favorite. Booked for 3 weeks. An extensive room service ledger. Multiple orders of caviar lobster, Cristal champagne. A man of expensive tastes." She paused. "Also charges for the business center, premium international calls, and a significant valet bill. And of course, tonight's event." She flipped a page, her expression unchanging. "The Sovereign Ballroom rental, the catering for 100 guests, the floral arrangements, the string quartet, the open bar featuring what I'm told is a top-shelf selection." She looked up, her gaze piercing Leo's. "It's all quite substantial." Leo was frozen, a statue of impotent rage and terror. Bianca, who had been clinging to his arm like a life raft, slowly let go. Her face was a storm of conflicting emotions, confusion giving way to a dawning, sickening comprehension. "The American Express you have on file was, as you know, declined earlier this week." Cassandra continued, her voice as calm as if she were reading a weather report. "The visa you provided as a backup is currently over its limit by—" She paused, tilting the page to the light for effect. "A rather shocking amount. I'm afraid, Leo, that you have an outstanding balance that you are in no position to pay." She finally closed the portfolio with a soft, final snap. "There is no misunderstanding. You have been enjoying my hospitality on credit that you do not have. You have been running a scam in my hotel." The accusation delivered so calmly was devastating. She turned her gaze to Bianca, and for a moment the ice in her eyes thawed into something resembling pity. "And you, Ms. Reed," she said softly, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "He brought you into this. He made you promises based on a life he couldn't afford, financed by the woman he discarded." Cassandra's eyes flicked back to Leo, locking him in place. He told me you were an upgrade, but it seems he was the one in need of an upgrade when he tried to get on my tab. That was the kill shot. Bianca's face went blank with shock, then hardened into a mask of cold fury. The Hermes bag, the crimson dress, the illusion of being the chosen one. It all evaporated, revealing the cheap, hollow reality underneath. She wasn't a prize. She was collateral damage in a pathetic con. She looked at Leo, not with heartbreak, but with the utter contempt one reserves for a bad investment. Leo, she whispered the single word, an indictment. When he could only stare dumbstruck, she made her decision. With a composure that mirrored Cassandra's, Bianca turned on her heel and walked away, her head held high. She didn't run. She simply exited the scene, cutting her losses, disappearing into the crowd without a backward glance. The last of Leo's support structure had crumbled. He was alone, exposed under the glare of 100 pairs of eyes. Cassandra gave another almost imperceptible nod. "Robert," she said, her voice ringing with the clear, cold authority of ownership. "Please have security escort Mr. Fordham to his suite. They will allow him 1 hour to pack his personal belongings. Have the luggage held at the bell desk until the bill is settled in full, and then have them escort him off my property." She took a step closer to Leo, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "Your stay at the Grand Majestic is over," she whispered, before raising her voice to a steely, resonant tone that echoed through the silent ballroom. "Checkout time is now." 2 uniformed security guards who had been waiting discreetly by the doors moved forward. They were large men, but they moved with a quiet professionalism that was far more intimidating than any overt aggression. They flanked Leo, their presence a silent, immovable verdict. Mr. Peterson watched the scene with a grim fascination, then turned to Cassandra with a slow, deliberate nod of respect. The Oakhaven deal was not just dead, it was a cautionary tale he'd be telling for years. As the guards gently but firmly began to lead him away, Leo's composure finally shattered completely. He looked at Cassandra, his face a desperate plea. All the arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who had lost everything in a single, perfectly executed maneuver. Cassandra met his gaze. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply held his eyes, letting him see the full, devastating scope of his miscalculation. Then slowly, she placed a protective hand over her still flat abdomen, a silent, secret acknowledgement of the real reason for her fight, the future she was protecting. It was the final move in a game of chess he never even knew he was playing. Then she turned her back on him. She turned back to Mr. Peterson, back to the party, back to her world. The gesture was absolute. She was dismissing him, not just from the ballroom, but from her life. The string quartet, taking their cue from Mr. Harrison, hesitantly began to play again. The spell was broken. The party, her party, would continue, and Leo Fordham was already a ghost. In the end, it was never just about the hotel. It was about reclaiming a narrative. Cassandra Davenport showed the world, and more importantly herself, that her value was not determined by a man's approval. She transformed her deepest heartbreak into her greatest power move, not with screaming or tears, but with the silent, deadly precision of a balance sheet and a deed. She proved that the ultimate upgrade isn't a new partner, it's a new version of yourself, one that is unapologetically powerful, fiercely independent, and in complete control of her own story. Her son would be born, not into a story of betrayal, but into the legacy of a mother who built an empire from the rubble of a broken heart. What did you think of Cassandra's epic revenge? Could you ever go to such lengths? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.